Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
When I received the letter from the HOA, I knew it was going to be a headache. A single sheet of paper, stark and uninviting, with bold lettering at the top that felt like it was practically shouting at me. My shed, they said, was encroaching on the common area, and they had decided it was time to make me pay for that mistake. I could either move it by a specific date, or they'd send out contractors to do the job themselves and slap me with the bill. The tone was cold, rigid, and left little room for negotiation. What really got under my skin was the knowledge that my shed wasn't the only one encroaching on the common area. Just a few houses down, House A had not only a shed but a fence that had been sprawling into the same unused common area for years. They weren't the only ones either. There were multiple houses with similar situations. And yet, here I was, the only one being singled out. When I called the HOA office to discuss the notice, I could already feel the tension rising. They transferred me to a representative who seemed to have a customer service demeanor, but it quickly became clear that I wasn't going to get anywhere with this person. I mentioned House A and the other violators, expecting some sort of acknowledgement that they'd enforce the rules fairly. But instead I was met with a dismissive, "Oh, that's been there for years, so it's fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me," I responded, trying to keep my frustration in check. "So because theirs has been there longer, it's suddenly not a violation? That doesn't make any sense. If you're going to enforce the rules, you should be doing it across the board, not just targeting one person." The representative seemed unbothered by my logic. "We have to prioritize our resources. We can't go after everyone at once. But since your shed is a recent issue, we need to address it first." "That's not how enforcement works," I shot back, now struggling to keep my cool. "You can't just pick and choose who to go after. That's selective enforcement." The conversation kept looping in circles. Every time I tried to bring up the other violations, the representative would dodge the point, citing things like historical precedents and limited resources. It was clear they had no intention of doing anything about the other sheds and fences. The more they talked, the more I felt like I was being stonewalled, like they were just giving me a rehearsed response that was meant to shut me up. But I wasn't about to let it go. "Look, I'm willing to comply," I finally said, hoping to strike some sort of compromise. "But only if I see that you're taking action against the other violations as well. It's only fair." The rep's response was infuriatingly bureaucratic. "We'll take your concerns into account, but we still need you to address your violation by the date stated in the notice." I hung up the phone feeling both angry and defeated. It wasn't just about the shed anymore. It was about the principle of the thing. The HOA had no problem flexing their muscle when it came to me, but when it came to others in the exact same situation, they conveniently looked the other way. It felt like they were playing favorites, and that was something I couldn't stomach. That evening, as I stood in my backyard looking at the shed, I found myself growing more and more bitter. The shed wasn't some eyesore or hazard. It was just a small practical structure tucked away in an area nobody ever used. The common area behind my house was just that, common. It wasn't landscaped or used for any communal activities. It was just a stretch of land that everyone ignored. That's why I and others had put our sheds and fences there in the first place. We weren't bothering anyone, and the HOA had ignored it for years. But now, for whatever reason, they had decided to make an example out of me. The next day, I decided I wasn't going to take this lying down. I went door to door, talking to my neighbors who I knew had similar violations. Most of them were surprised to hear about the notice I received, and when I told them that the HOA was only targeting me, they were just as outraged. We were all in the same boat, but for some reason I was the only one being forced to deal with it. "I don't understand why they're coming after you, and not us," said my neighbor Linda from House B, whose fence had been extending into the common area for over a decade. "It's not right. We should all be treated the same." "Exactly," I replied, feeling a bit of solidarity forming. "If they want to enforce the rules, fine, but they need to enforce them for everyone, not just pick and choose." Linda nodded. "We should go to the next HOA meeting together and bring this up. They can't ignore all of us." By the time I finished talking to my neighbors, I had a small group of people who were just as fed up as I was. We all agreed to attend the upcoming HOA meeting and make our voices heard. The night of the meeting, I walked into the community center with a mixture of nerves and determination. I wasn't usually one for public speaking, but I was ready to stand up for what was right. The room was filled with the usual crowd, mostly older residents who had lived in the neighborhood for years, and a handful of younger families like mine. At the front of the room sat the HOA board members, looking stern and authoritative as they prepared to start the meeting. As the meeting progressed, they went through the usual agenda items: budget reports, community events, maintenance updates. It was all routine, and nobody seemed particularly engaged. But then they opened the floor for community concerns, and that's when I made my move. I stood up and addressed the board, my voice steady but firm. I'm here because I received a violation notice regarding my shed, which apparently crosses the property line into the common area. I'm not here to dispute that. I know it's in violation. But what I do have a problem with is the selective enforcement of this rule. The room grew quieter as I continued, and I could feel the eyes of the board members on me. There are multiple properties in this neighborhood that have sheds and fences in the same common area. Some have been there for years, but as far as I know, I'm the only one who's received a notice. How is that fair? One of the board members, a stern-looking woman named Karen who always seemed to relish these meetings, leaned forward. We enforce the rules as we become aware of violations. Your shed came to our attention recently, and that's why you received the notice. And what about the others? I pressed. I know for a fact that House A and several others have structures in the same common area. If you're going to enforce the rules, then enforce them equally. Otherwise, it just feels like you're targeting specific people. Karen didn't seem fazed. We can't address every violation at once. We have to prioritize our resources. Prioritize, I repeated, my frustration bubbling to the surface. This isn't about resources. This is about fairness. You can't just decide to enforce a rule for one person and ignore it for others, especially when we're all in the same situation. A murmur of agreement spread through the room, and I could see a few of my neighbors nodding along. But Karen wasn't backing down. The board will consider your concerns, but in the meantime, you still need to comply with the notice. We have to maintain the integrity of our community standards. I could feel my anger rising. Community standards? What community standards? The ones that apply only when it's convenient for you. I'm asking for equal treatment, nothing more. If you're going to make me move my shed, then you need to make everyone else do the same. At this point, another board member, an older man with a calm demeanor, tried to step in. Let's not get too heated here. We understand your concerns and will take them into consideration. But we have to follow the process. The process is broken, I snapped. You're supposed to represent all of us, not just pick and choose who gets punished. This is why people get frustrated with HOAs. It's this kind of arbitrary enforcement that makes us feel like we're being treated unfairly. The tension in the room was thick, and for a moment I wondered if I had pushed too hard. But then one of my neighbors stood up. She's right, he said, his voice strong and clear. We've all got violations, and we all need to be treated the same. If you're going to enforce the rules, then enforce them for everyone. More voices joined in, and soon it was clear that I wasn't alone in my frustration. The board members looked around, clearly taken aback by the level of pushback they were receiving. It wasn't just me anymore. It was a group of residents demanding fair treatment. Karen, still unwilling to budge, tried to regain control of the situation. We will review all the violations in the community and address them accordingly. But you must understand that these things take time. Time isn't the issue, I countered. The issue is fairness. I'll move my shed, but only if you commit to enforcing the rules for everyone else too. The meeting eventually wound down, but the board members knew they had a problem on their hands. They couldn't continue to enforce the rules selectively without facing more backlash from the community. As I left the meeting, I felt a sense of accomplishment, but I also knew the battle wasn't over. In the days that followed, I kept a close eye on the HOA. They did start sending out more notices, not just to me, but to other violators as well. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. They couldn't ignore us anymore, and that was a victory in itself. I did end up moving my shed, but I did it on my terms, knowing that I had stood up for myself and my neighbors. The HOA had tried to bully me into compliance, but in the end, they had to face the fact that they couldn't just enforce the rules whenever it suited them. It was about fairness, about holding them accountable to the same standards they expected us to follow. And as I stood in my newly rearranged backyard, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I hadn't just fought for myself. I had fought for the principle of the thing. The HOA only sort of won this round because I moved my shed, but they knew I wasn't going to back down easily, not when fairness was on the line. You have to move your shed, then once you have complied, you then have grounds for a complaint and possible lawsuit for targeting you as long as you can prove they have not given notices to others and or have a prior written agreement allowing those to be there which you may not be privy to. Former board etc. The "I'll move mine once I see them moving theirs" isn't how it works. Someone has to go first, creating the domino effect. Since you believe you were served first, that is you. Sadly, it's a process, and though you may disagree, it is a process you agreed to when you moved in. Odds are the owner of the shed is a current board member, former board member, or a friend of a board member. You are most likely dealing with a management company and they are being told what to do. Attend a board meeting and bring it up so it is on the record as to why your neighbor is not receiving the same violation you did. There is a change that they asked for permission and received it. You might want to ask them what they did to prevent getting a violation and do the same. This story is a classic example of making a mountain out of a molehill. Her narrative is filled with self-righteousness, yet the actual victory is simply moving a shed. She claims they stood up for fairness and accountability, but the story lacks any substantial evidence of real change within the HOA. Her actions seem more about personal satisfaction than any real community benefit. Furthermore, the story glosses over the complexities of HOA regulations and enforcement, reducing it to a simplistic us versus them scenario. Her pride in their actions feels unwarranted, as the story doesn't demonstrate any meaningful shift in the HOA's behavior or policies. Instead of a tale of triumph, it reads more like a personal rant against authority, without offering any constructive insights or solutions. The narrative could have explored the nuances of HOA governance and the challenges of balancing individual rights with community standards, but instead it settles for a shallow victory lap.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.